old American bottles as Yamashita treasure markers. Some of you might be wondering why many of the old bottles used by the Japanese Imperial Army soldiers as markers to their hidden treasure deposit are made in the US or other European countries. We can explain it by going back into history, which was during the time when the Japanese Imperial Army was nearing their complete defeat against the Allied forces. The main reason why the Japanese Imperial Army was losing the war was due to their economic collapse. Because of their atrocities, particularly to all countries that they got conquered, all other countries no longer want to make trades to their economy. Thus, their economy had nowhere to go but to collapse. As a result, Japan can no longer sustain and send supplies to their Japanese Imperial armies, assigned in various different countries that they had taken control of. As a result, their Japanese Imperial Army went out of ammunition and food supplies. So all they could do was nothing but to escape and run away from their pursuers. But according to the Japanese general, who became one of my close friends, he and his troops managed to survive by stealing the supplies that were meant for the Allied forces and civilians. Based on his claims, the supplies of the Allied forces were delivered via a cargo plane. They were stored in wooden boxes and they dropped them off the plane. Of course, these supply boxes were guided by small parachutes so that they could safely land on the ground without getting smashed. When the cargo plane arrived, they often dropped their supplies to the locations or camps of their Allied forces. But aside from their fellow troops, they also dropped more food supplies to the affected residents or civilians nearby. Since the Japanese Imperial Army soldiers were in their desperate hunger, they often risked themselves chasing the supplies that were meant for the civilians. And in most cases, they were always lucky to retrieve them all by themselves, because many of the civilians were often scared to get them. The Japanese soldiers often took all of them, and no leftovers for the civilians. Thus, they took them all inside their hiding place, and after consuming them to satisfy their hunger, they used the bottles for marking their hidden Yamashita treasures. This is the main reason why many of the old bottles used by the Japanese Imperial Army as markers were made from America or other countries of Europe. Of course, there are also old bottles that were made from Japan, but there were only a few of them. It was because they don't seem to like using bottles but more on ceramic containers. And aside from their very own bottles, they also got a few old bottles that were made in the Philippines. As an additional topic with regards to old bottles, what exactly is the reason why the Japanese Imperial Army soldiers used them as markers? The main reason why they preferred using bottles as compared to etching their signs on surfaces of rocks is that bottles tend to have much better preservation. These objects don't literally degrade over time, even if they got buried under the ground for many years.